Quiet very suddenly, but before that, this was a very happy crowd. And the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. Good morning and welcome to today's hearing entitled An Overview of the National Science Foundation Budget Proposal for Fiscal Year 2019. And I'll recognize myself for an opening statement. Today we welcome Dr. Córdova, the Director of National Science Foundation, and Dr. Maria Zuber, Chair of the National Science Board, to testify about the administration's budget request and funding priorities for the National Science Foundation in fiscal year 2019. Before its creation in 1950, the NSF's mission has been to promote fundamental scientific discovery. The NSF is the only federal agency that supports basic research across all scientific fields, including research in areas like national security, energy, quantum technology, biotechnology, STEM education, and cybersecurity. Through competitive grants, the NSF funds more than 360,000 scientists, engineers, and students across the country. This helps make the United States a world leader in knowledge and innovation. The committee finished the last Congress by completing work on the American Innovation and Competitiveness Act, authorizing some of the NSF's activities, including work on STEM education and high-performance computing. The law made permanent transparency and accountability policies that require the NSF to describe the research projects it funds in non-technical terms. The law also improved the NSF grant-making process, affirming that research funded through the merit review selection process must be in the national interest. And I want to recognize Dr. Córdova for the steps the NSF has taken to improve accountability over the last 3 years, and acknowledge Dr. Zuber's work on behalf of the National Science Board as well. I have to say that sometimes in the past I have been critical of the NSF for funding too many projects that seem marginal or frivolous. When the NSF spent $700,000 on a climate change musical or $1.5 million to study pasture management in Mongolia, it reduced investments in projects that could yield groundbreaking new knowledge and discoveries. I believe there has certainly been improvement, but challenges remain. I am concerned that there are too many projects being funded in the social, behavioral, and economic sciences that are not worthy of taxpayers' dollars. For example, in the past year, the NSF has spent $310,000 to study congressional Dear Colleague letters, $450,000 to study why there is no single English word for light blue, $330,000 to study cell phone use by Tanzanian women, $138,000 to study monkey responses to inequity and violated expectation, $217,000 to document a language spoken in 2 villages in northern Pakistan, and $75,000 to produce a description of Maku, an extinct Amazon language. Social behavioral science can help solve some complex problems that touch several areas of science. For instance, protecting computers and computer networks from hackers requires research in both computer and behavioral science. But when only 1 out of 5 requests for grants is being funded, there must be priorities. We cannot afford to misspend another dollar on low priority or frivolous activities. Simply put, the NSF should fund useful research over the useless. China now has the world's fastest supercomputer and has just passed the U.S. for the first time to lead the world in the number and total performance of supercomputers. China is also making rapid progress in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, human genome editing, and other crucial areas of science and technology. Unfortunately, as China leaps forward, the U.S. is slowing down investment in key areas of basic research like physics and computing. This will not change unless taxpayers' money is better invested. I also am concerned about whether or not the NSF is developing its STEM workforce programs to meet the needs of our economy. The United States continues to lag significantly behind China and the European Union in science and engineering bachelor's degrees, with China producing more than twice the number of STEM undergraduates. In the physical and biological sciences, China produces 4 times more undergraduates in those fields than the U.S. The NSF plays a critical role in helping educate and train the next generation of STEM workers. We need to invest in young people who will go into fields where there is a national need and good-paying jobs. Now that there is a 2-year budget agreement in place, we have an opportunity to authorize the science agencies under our committee's jurisdiction, including the NSF, to rebalance priorities and ensure that our nation's science agencies are on a trajectory to keep America at the forefront of scientific knowledge and discovery. This committee has demonstrated that there is broad support for basic and fundamental research and STEM education. 20 of the 22 bills the Science, Space, and Technology Committee has brought to the House floor of this Congress have been bipartisan pieces of legislation. We are committed to maintaining America's leadership in science, thereby ensuring future economic prosperity. That concludes my opening statement. The ranking member, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Johnson, is recognized for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman Smith, and good morning. I appreciate you holding this hearing, and I want to welcome Dr. Córdova and Dr. Zuber. I'm pleased that we have both of you here this morning and to help us understand the fiscal 2019 budget request for the National Science Foundation and the potential impact of this request on NSF's ability to help support U.S. leadership in science. Funding for the National Science Foundation peaked in 2010 at $7.7 billion. In the years since then, the budget has stagnated at or below $7.5 billion. This is the case despite the Obama administration requesting increases each year. In stark contrast, last year, the Trump administration proposed to cut NSF by 11%. And this year, until Congress passed the budget agreement, the proposed cut was closer to 30%. This administration has demonstrated time and again how little they value science. Given these trends, most of us are relieved when the NSF budget remains flat rather than cut. However, flat is a decline in real dollars, and it represents a terribly low standard for which to judge our nation's standing in science and technology. We will hear in Dr. Zuber's testimony how other countries are doubling down on their investments in R&D while we are cutting. Having said that, I applaud Dr. Córdova and your team at NSF for being as bold and forward-looking as you could be, given the constraints imposed upon you by the budget of the White House. I will highlight just a few items of interest or concern that I hope we can discuss further in the hearing. Advancing science to solve our national and global challenges increasingly depends on teams of scientists from various disciplines coming together in what is now commonly known as convergent research. However, for generations, universities and the National Science Foundation itself have been organized around disciplines. While advances in these core disciplines do and must continue, this organizational structure has created stovepipes and inhibited convergent research. In fiscal year 2019 budget requests, NSF takes a big leap to transcend those traditional boundaries through dedicated funding for its 10 big ideas. In that respect, this is an exciting budget proposal. However, having been forced into a zero-sum choice, the agency had to make cuts elsewhere, namely to the core research programs and to education and training programs at all levels. These trade-offs merit further discussion before we can be comfortable that the benefits outweigh the potential harm. This budget also represents the first time that the agency is singling out one of its research directorates for a disproportionate cut, while every other directorate is nearly flat. The Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate, or the SBE, would be cut by 11%. I do not doubt this steep cut was dictated from the White House. However, this ongoing devaluing of the role of SBE in meeting our national challenges could have damaging consequences. I look forward to hearing from Dr. Córdova and Dr. Zuber on what steps NSF will take to mitigate this harm. I'm pleased to see the Antarctica Infrastructure Modernization for Science, or AIMS, project in the request, along with a proposal for a mid-scale research infrastructure program. I look forward to hearing more about both of these proposals. Finally, as I alluded to earlier, while there are a few bright spots in education and broadening participation funding, I am concerned about the overall cuts to education in this budget. Education and training programs across the research account would be cut by nearly 25%. Proven programs such as Norris Teacher Scholarship Program, research experiences for undergraduates, and the Graduate Research Fellowships would all receive steep cuts. NSF has a dual mission of research and education. We cannot afford to back away from our commitment to either one. I thank you, Dr. Córdova and Dr. Zuber, for being here this morning to help us examine these issues and concerns in more detail. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Our first witness today is Dr. Francais Córdova, Director of the National Science Foundation. Dr. Córdova was sworn in as Director of the NSF in March 2014. She previously served as President of Purdue University from 2007 to 2012. From 1993 to 1996, Dr. Córdova served as the Chief Scientist at NASA, and she is a recipient of NASA's highest honor, the Distinguished Service Medal. Dr. Córdova has a Bachelor's of Arts from Stanford University and a PhD in Physics from the California Institute of Technology. Joining Director Córdova today to assist in answering technical questions is Dr. Joan Farini Munde, Acting Chief Operating Officer of the National Science Foundation. Previously, she led the NSF Education and Human Resources Directorate and co-chaired the White House National Science and Technology Council's Federal Coordination and STEM Education Task Force. Prior to the NSF, she was a Distinguished Professor of Mathematics Education at Michigan State University. Dr. Munde holds a PhD in Mathematics Education from the University of New Hampshire. Our second witness today is Dr. Maria Zuber, Chair of the National Science Board. In 2013, Dr. Zuber was appointed Vice President for Research at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where she oversees more than a dozen research laboratories and centers. Dr. Zuber was awarded the NASA Distinguished Public Service Medal in 2004, and in 2008, she was named to the U.S. News list of America's Best Leaders. She received a Bachelor of Arts in Astronomy from the University of Pennsylvania, as well as a Master of Science and PhD, both in Geophysics from Brown University. We welcome you all and look forward to your testimony. And Dr. Córdova, if you'll begin.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the committee. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss the President's fiscal year 2019 budget request for the National Science Foundation. The request is $7.47 billion, level with the FY19 appropriation. This level of funding reflects the administration's commitment to NSF's role in strengthening the nation's economy, national security, and global leadership in sciences and engineering. NSF funds basic research that advances and sustains American preeminence in the innovation economy. NSF accounts for approximately 27% of the total federal budget for basic research conducted at U.S. colleges and universities. For computer science, that number is 83%. For biology, 69%. For engineering, 46%. These investments produce invaluable benefits to our nation and the world. Economists have noted that over 50% of America's economic growth of the past 50 years is attributable to technological innovation. Much of it is the fruit of the uniquely American research and innovation ecosystem among academia, industry, and government, where ideas, artifacts, and people flow among these sectors. In information technology, this is embodied in this tire tracks diagram. This extraordinary ecosystem has given rise to multi-billion-dollar industries, and it all begins, as the diagram shows, with investment in fundamental long-term research, often made with federal dollars and often made many years, even decades, before it evolved into billion-dollar businesses. MRI technology, gene editing, barcode technology, Google, 3D printing, these are all areas NSF invested in early that have transformed our lives. Today, NSF is at the forefront of research in big data, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and robotics, areas that will power the future economy. Our FY19 request also incorporates new and innovative ways of doing business that will position NSF at the leading edge of discovery. First, NSF will invest in our 10 big ideas. The big ideas represent unique opportunities to position our nation at the frontiers, indeed, to define the frontiers of global science and engineering leadership. An investment of $30 million is requested for each of the 6 research-focused big ideas. 4 other big ideas, such as mid-scale facilities and the Includes initiative, focus on new approaches to increase opportunities for discovery and expand the STEM community. Our success also requires innovative approaches to leveraging resources over all fields of science. In FY19, NSF will initiate 2 convergence accelerators, new centers that will converge around important national challenges requiring interdisciplinary expertise. The accelerators will streamline operations and collaborations, focusing on results and outcomes that can be achieved quickly. An investment of $60 million will support 2 convergence accelerators for 2 of the big ideas, harnessing the data revolution for 21st century science and engineering and the future of work at the human technology frontier. These big ideas were chosen because of their readiness for convergent and translational research. We expect to catalyze an additional $40 million in investment by external partners, including the private sector, other federal agencies, and international funders. Equally important to our sustained global leadership in science and engineering are investments in STEM education. At NSF, our education activities are integrated with research. In FY19, NSF will continue to invest in CyberCore, Computer Science for All, the Advanced Technical Education Program, and other initiatives that support teachers, students, and researchers from K through 12 to lifelong learning environments. We will not have the discoveries of tomorrow without a skilled workforce prepared for tomorrow. Mr. Chairman, I had the honor of attending the 2017 Nobel Prize Award ceremony in Stockholm, Sweden. I was there to celebrate scientists in the fields of physics, economics, biology, and chemistry. All 8 U.S. Nobelists were at some point in their careers supported by NSF. 3 of them were honored for the LIGO discovery of gravitational waves, a discovery only made possible by 40 years of NSF support. In fact, NSF-funded researchers account for 231 Nobel Prizes dating back to 1955. This is but one powerful example of why Congress's support for NSF and fundamental basic research is so vital. Another is in the tire tracks diagram, which exhibits some of NSF's contributions to the growth of new, robust businesses. This committee has played an important role in these successes. Through the AICA, it continues to make our agency stronger in its processes to deliver the best to the American people. Thank you for your continued support of NSF.
Thank you, Dr. Córdova. Do you happen to have a hard copy of the PowerPoint that was just up on the screen? And if so, I'd like to make copies for members, maybe even before the questions.
Yes.
Okay.
If you have someone I can hand it to, I'd be happy to do that.
That would be great.
Thank you.
And Dr. Zuber.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about the President's fiscal year 2019 budget request for the National Science Foundation. An investment in knowledge always pays the best interest, declared Benjamin Franklin, our nation's founding innovator. Since World War II, the United States has led the world in research, transforming our lives, driving economic growth, and underpinning national security. Sustained bipartisan commitment to investing in fundamental research helped establish and maintain U.S. leadership in science and technology. But the global science and technology landscape is rapidly changing. Other nations are upping their game, For the first time in over a half-century, our S&T leadership is being challenged. According to the board's 2018 Science and Engineering Indicators Report, China's spending on R&D has grown by an average of 18% since the year 2000, while ours has grown by only 4%. Since 2000, China has tripled the number of STEM bachelor's degree awardees. And between 2013 and 2016, just 3 years, venture capital in China climbed from 5% to 27% of the global share, the fastest increase of any economy. Although these trends are not new, in some cutting-edge areas of research, the trajectory is more pronounced. Within the last year, China erased the U.S. advantage in supercomputing, claiming more than 200 of the fastest 500 supercomputers to our 143. Over the next 5 years, China plans to invest 100 times more in artificial intelligence than the U.S. did in 2016. At the same time, total federal R&D funding has been declining from $127 billion in 2011 to $120 billion in 2015. Federal R&D spending as a share of GDP is now the lowest it has been since 1953. These choices have concrete consequences. If current trends continue, China will surpass the United States in total R&D expenditures sometime this year. Despite these ominous trends, the board is encouraged by Congress's agreement on a budgetary framework and the President working within those caps to prioritize NSF's mission of discovery in research and the national interest. With the requested level of funding in FY19, NSF will support basic research across all fields of science and engineering that create knowledge while allowing investment in priority areas. The board recognizes the fiscal challenge that Congress wrestles. In such difficult times, there can be a tendency to play it safe. But as America's innovation agency, NSF is not going to play it safe. First, the agency is embracing our nation's entrepreneurial spirit and trying something new. As the director has just described, NSF proposes to break out of academic silos by investing in new elements to promote cutting-edge interdisciplinary research at the frontiers of science and technology, the big ideas and convergence accelerators. Much transformative research happens at the intersection of scientific fields. The board believes this proactive approach is essential if NSF is to succeed in its mission to advance the frontiers of science. Next, our nation's ability to discover, invent, and innovate relies on our ability to leverage America's greatest competitive advantage, our people. To ensure that Americans are equipped to thrive in a globally competitive knowledge economy, NSF will work with Congress, the administration, business leaders, educators, and others to create a STEM-capable U.S. workforce. Our workforce of the future must leverage the hard work, creativity, and ingenuity of women and men of all ages, education levels, and backgrounds. NSF will continue to build this workforce through initiatives such as Includes, ATE, and CyberCore. Finally, NSF is committed to innovating and improving our internal processes. The board takes its responsibility to taxpayers seriously. We are now taking a fresh look at the merit review report, working with NSF to advance formal risk thinking in strategic planning and priority setting, and strengthening our oversight of major research facilities. And I would be remiss if I did not thank you, Chairman Smith, for your leadership in holding us to the highest standards of accountability and transparency. Investing in discovery research now will give us the keys to meeting the unpredictable national security, economic, and health challenges of tomorrow. As President Trump warned, losing our innovation and technological edge would have far-reaching negative implications for American prosperity and power. We need a renewed and committed strategy to hold on to this key national asset. But in challenge, there is also opportunity. If we capitalize on the strong foundations of our innovation ecosystem and the talents of our people, we can pursue grand visions, enable revolutionary ideas, and reap the unexpected advances that emerge from dreaming boldly and fearlessly to pursue fundamental science. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Zuber. I'll recognize myself for questions and address the first one to Dr. Córdova. Dr. Córdova, last year, I think you had 40,000 grant proposals that were not funded. You clearly have an abundance of projects to choose from, and as I mentioned in my opening statement, you only approve about 1 out of every 5 proposals. How do you ensure that the American people that only the best projects are being funded? I mentioned in my opening statement a half a dozen that I thought were questionable. It seems to me that none of them should have been funded. I don't see the justification myself, but how do you screen proposals? How do you ensure that they are in the national interest?
As Dr. Zuber mentioned, our merit review process is really the answer to your question, Chairman Smith. Every one of the proposals that we receive, and we receive approximately 50,000 a year, go through our world-lauded merit review process, in which many countries of the world have copied, because it is a process of very high integrity. I want to address just for a second your specific question on particular proposals. I think our very first meeting a week after I took this job, so that would be 4 years ago, was about such proposals. And I took this very personally to examine how these proposals were approved, and personally looked at the individual proposals. Then we had a team of people look at the whole merit review process that was associated with each one, and I was convinced in the end, a process that I had to do myself, I was convinced in the end that each one met our very high standards of intellectual merit and broader impact.
Understand the merit review process. Let me just pick one out. Would you get back to me as to why the merit review process found $450,000 to study why there is no single English word for light blue? Will you get back to me on why that was in the national interest, for example?
Yes, of course. For each one of the projects that's been questioned, we have written a report. They're all online.
Okay.
I do not know about that particular one, but of course, we'll get back.
Okay, I appreciate that. Dr. Zuber, I've talked about this before, but China is reportedly investing $10 billion in quantum research, far more than the United States. How can the U.S. stay competitive, and isn't that a threat and a danger for China to keep outspending us in so many of these research areas?
Well, quantum is, of course, incredibly important for national security, but also on the financial system as well, since cybersecurity affects financial transactions and actually personal transactions, the energy grid, et cetera. So there are a variety of places in the U.S. government that invest in cybersecurity, and also the private sector as well, and we need some communication there. But I think a key thing that we have to have is we need coordination among different agencies. Some are on the classified side, some are on the unclassified side.
Right.
But the basic research, is done on the unclassified side, and there needs to be some crosstalk in terms of what is actually needed early on. And then that can be communicated, and then the classified side can take it over. Another thing that I would say is that we need to be thinking about our education system as well and evolving it. So how many programs have quantum engineering? Okay, MIT doesn't even have quantum engineering as a discipline, and we need to be thinking about.
Can't you change
although
that?
we certainly are teaching those sorts of things, but we don't have a specific program on it.
Okay.
And I think research universities ought to be thinking about developing those programs to train the next generation of researchers that are needed to take on these
Let me go to my next question. I assume you'll have some influence in trying to persuade MIT to have a program in quantum engineering, right?
I think I might be able to.
Okay, good. Last question is this. The FBI recently shared concerns that countries like China are exploiting U.S. academic institutions and are taking advantage of the federal research funding. they're also trying to indoctrinate students. Do you share the FBI's concerns?
There certainly is some legitimacy to those concerns. Certainly the U.S. needs to interact with China. They're a global power. There are things that it makes sense for us to collaborate on. It makes sense for us to attract talented Chinese students. We ought to work hard at keeping the best people in the U.S. after they get their degrees. But we need to do a much better job in terms of training those students and actually our professors about issues of intellectual property, so that we can respect the inventions and achievements of our people in the universities.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Zuber. We'll go to the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici, for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Córdova, Dr. Zuber, and Dr. Is it Farini Monday? Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Johnson. I just wanted to mention, I know, Chairman Smith, in your opening, you mentioned a couple of NSF-funded projects that you thought were questionable. I hope this year you can attend with us the Golden Goose Awards. The Golden Goose Awards are bipartisan recognition of scientists whose federally funded basic research has led to innovations with a significant impact on society, and it's often research with odd-sounding titles or names. So I hope you can join us for that, because it's a really inspiring event. This is a really important conversation we're having. We do want the United States to continue to be a leader, but unfortunately this budget is, I believe, about the 9th year of flat funding. If we want to continue to be the leader, we should be increasing investments, not decreasing investments in the National Science Foundation. Dr. Córdova, Oregon State University is leading efforts to design and construct the next generation of NSF regional class research vessels. The ships are designed to operate primarily in coastal waters and bays and estuaries on the west, east, and Gulf coasts. They reflect an important long-term investment to advance marine transportation, sound fisheries management, national security priorities. This research is essential for any coastal region. And I appreciate the NSF efforts in the short term to balance investments in research and infrastructure. But I am disappointed that the NSF budget request supports the construction of only 2 rather than 3 research class vessels. Without Congress investing in the 3 ships, many of the nation's oceanographic scientists will be forced to rely on older ships that are less efficient to operate and maintain, and that lack the technological and scientific capabilities for conducting research safely with the most advanced methods of the 21st century. Additionally, because of economies of scale, the second ship is less expensive than the first, and the third would be less expensive than the second. So could you please explain to the panel how funding for a third vessel would contribute to the work of the NSF and the advancement of ocean sciences?
Thank you, Congresswoman. The 2 RCRVs, which are in our budget, will significantly improve the support of science over the current capabilities. And this number of new vessels is in line with the minimum number recommended in the National Academy's Sea Change report. 2 vessels will support research on all major coastlines through the existing Coastal Research Vessels program. And that is what is in our budget request.
Thank you. I just want to say for the record that because a third would be less expensive than a second, and it would be beneficial to have the third, I hope that somehow we can get to 3 vessels. Also, NSF is proposing a steep cut of 11% to the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences, SBE. I'm disappointed, but actually not surprised that the administration is targeting this program. But one of America's greatest strengths is innovation. It's not enough to educate world-class engineers, technologists, and scientists. We also need creative and critical thinkers. Our propensity for being entrepreneurial and cutting edge is fostered through the arts and social science education. In fact, the Weather Forecasting Innovation Act I worked on and was signed into law last year included language about incorporating social sciences in community readiness and resilience efforts, especially in how we communicate that. So Dr. Córdova and Dr. Zuber, you've both made strong statements about the value of SBE sciences in the past. Can you tell us more about SBE sciences and how they intersect with issues of national importance? And can you assure members of this committee that the NSF is committed to its mission of supporting all fields of science and engineering, including social sciences?
Yes, I'll start, and I'm sure Dr. Zuber can add to this. So the last year, we asked the National Academies to do a study on the value of the social and behavioral economic sciences, and they did a study very quickly in just a few months' time that had a wonderful group of examples about how important these sciences have been to national needs. The second point I want to make is that we have, in this new structure that we've described here today, that's in the FY19 budget of the big ideas, that all of the big ideas are convergent ideas. They bring together all the disciplines, and social and behavioral sciences will be a big part of that contribution. So there will be many opportunities under those big ideas to further the value of the sciences.
Thank you. Microphone.
Excuse me. So there are many obvious examples of areas where the social and behavioral sciences are important for economic competitiveness and national security. So for you talked about in weather forecasting, having what's the right time to put out a siren, to have people take shelter. If you do it too often, people will tend to ignore it. There are cases in opioid abuse there where we need information on the social and behavioral sciences to understand trends and threats. Facial recognition software actually was used by a laboratory that I see, Lincoln Laboratory, that was actually used to then apprehend the marathon bombers. So one can go on and on about the value of these, and I think we actually need to go by more than just the titles, because when we go in and we actually see what the actual research is in these grants, I agree with the director that it's been through rigorous peer review and it's substantive. And the final thing that I would say on this is that we're actually at the forefront of a revolution in the social and behavioral sciences. So in SBE right now, they're using the computer power that mathematical and physical sciences used a decade ago. So this entire field is really moving into a much more quantitative regime, and so that will just allow a lot of really objective, important work to take place in support of the other areas of science within it.
Thank you. I see my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Bonamici. The gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I have been very concerned that we are not putting enough emphasis on trying to secure the world in case we would spot an asteroid heading toward the Earth. And over the years, I've been very conscious of this because that could happen tomorrow. And I've talked about it over the years, and it seems to me that we are not taking the steps that we could so that if that asteroid is seen, that we know what we're going to do, how to deflect it, et cetera. One of the tools that is vital in that goal, in achieving that goal of being able to identify the course of some object in space that could do incredible damage to the world. One of the elements is the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico. It's it actually provides us the ability to go years out and charting the course to see if it is dangerous to the world. We got a bunch of young people here, and we want you to have the world that we had, and we need to be prepared for a possibility that an asteroid could actually come in and destroy that world. What are we doing to make sure that what Arecibo has been doing in providing that service and that ability to chart those, how are we making sure that that is still getting done?
As you know, a lot of that work is done by NASA as a participant at Arecibo Observatory. We have just recently announced a new partnership with the University of Central Florida, which will be gradually taking over the management of Arecibo. And this was a good solution, we feel, to our divestment planning for that observatory, which will take place over several years' time. And we think it's in very good hands with the University of Central Florida as the steward. The hurricanes, as you know, did wreak some damage on the observatory. It wreaked a lot more damage on the entire island, which everybody is trying to recover from. We are now back up with the observatory up and running. There are certain things that we still can't do, but we have supplemental funding request included in the Bipartisan Budget Act for necessary expenses to repair.
So are you
our
committed
facility.
to making sure that the Arecibo telescope and its capabilities of spotting these types of objects that could threaten the planet, that it will still, whatever how you restructure the system,
Right.
it still will provide that capability to those people who are concerned about this issue?
As long as we have our partnership with NASA, yes, they are the ones that are really doing that program with us at Arecibo.
Okay, so it's a qualified yes.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes, all right. I was wondering, and we're talking about the budget, sometimes when the chairman justifiably says, wait a minute, what kind of study is this? Why did you do that? And, you know, when I was younger, my father was a military officer, and he took me outside at a certain time of year and said, see all those planes flying around? I was ordered to send those planes flying around because we had to use up the fuel allotment, and we had to use our budget, totally use it up, or they were afraid that they would lose the budget the next year. Now, how many of these type of nonsensical studies that we're talking about is simply at the end of the fiscal year being used to make sure that they use up the budget so they'll get the same amount next year?
Well, I appreciate your concern, but I think the answer would be none of them. We have, again, going back to our merit review process, we have at any given day several hundred people from the external community at NSF reviewing the proposals and grading them very strictly. We leave about $4 billion worth of proposals rated excellent on the cutting room floor because we don't have enough to fund them. So you can be sure that the ones we do fund have gone through a very rigorous process. And also I want to take this opportunity to add that as of March 1st of this year, new language has been inserted in all NSF award abstracts, and this says, and I quote, "This award reflects NSF's statutory mission and has been deemed worthy of support through evaluation using the Foundation's intellectual merit and broader impacts review criteria." And it's a pause for every division leader who has the ultimate approval of programs that are approved within the division by the program officers or recommended for funding. They have the final sign-off that is this program does it fulfill national needs? Does it really pass the merit review criteria?
Well, as the chairman noted, there are some projects that passed, and obviously somebody's judgment was impaired, or as I say, people were looking to use their budget. But we'll be watching.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
we
you.
wish you well.
And Congressman Rohrabacher, I'd be pleased to visit you in your office and go through we've written a response to every proposal that's been criticized. Those responses I share with people that publish the criticisms, and they're all online. And I think once we
fair. I'll
talk
take a
about
look at it. Thank
Dr. Córdova, I just looked at the justification for $450,000 for light blue. If you find anything in the national interest in your justification, let me know. I did not see it. The gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. Esty, is recognized for her question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for joining us here today for these incredibly important issues that have both short-term and long-term impacts for all Americans. Millions of Americans are unquestionably better off because of the basic research that the National Science Foundation has funded over decades. It's helped spawn, as you noted, Dr. Córdova, some of the giant companies, the cutting-edge companies in this country, like Google and Symantec and Qualcomm. But I have to tell you, and in my district recently, one of the state universities, Central Connecticut State University, just received a $5 million grant to reach out to underrepresented and minority students to encourage their participation in the sciences. So I know from the ground level how important that is both to the students, but also to the companies in the area who need to see that talented pipeline of students. But that's one of the reasons why I'm so concerned that the president's budget is not going up, but rather going down. And the purchasing power has been steadily eroded for quite a number of years now. Since 2000, China has grown its R&D budget by approximately 18% annually. In the United States, that has increased by 4%. We are seeing the impacts of that across the board. I'm hearing from companies that, and I'm hearing from research institutions, they cannot retain their top scholars because other countries are offering them more predictable funding for longer periods of time and greater flexibility. So I'm deeply concerned about that. We try to get the best and brightest. Some of them are homegrown, some of them are from around the world. But then for, and sometimes immigration reasons, they're not allowed to stay, and that's a different, I realize, not your department, but if you care to talk about the impact that's having on our higher ed and research, I'd welcome that. But particularly, this impact on not having consistent high-level funding is making our research institutions like UConn and Yale in my state of Connecticut are having increasing difficulty in retaining the top-tier talent. And that has spillover effects, and that means then the companies don't want to stay because they aren't seeing the best research. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're hearing and what you're seeing on that front?
To turn for a response to our Chief Operating Officer, who was, as you know, one time headed our Education and Human Resources Directorate.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. A big piece of our investment, as you have noted, of course, is developing pathways for talent for STEM, which is a piece of creating an ecosystem that enables a healthy STEM enterprise to occur in states, in universities, and in the nation. And we're very pleased with the breadth of our STEM education investments. They include our new Big Idea Includes program, which is very much focused on making certain that we are tapping the full diversity of our nation, the full talent of our nation, to ensure that we have a set of people who will be able to take leadership roles in universities, in the private sector going forward. So we see this as a very important piece of our overall investment. I think I would add as well that our restructuring within this particular budget to focus on the innovations that will be possible through our big ideas, we hope will be very exciting to the research community and will intrigue scholars across the nation because of the new convergence possibilities within this area.
But we're also looking at the fact that, and Dr. Córdova, you mentioned this, the number of project proposals that receive excellent ratings and yet can't be funded because there simply isn't enough money to go around. And I have to say I'm concerned about that because when we do have top-tier talent and we do have top-tier research projects that we're unable to fund, then we get brain drain out of this country, and it's hard to bring them back. Dr. Zuber?
Yeah, so if I could comment on that. So I don't personally know what the right level of funding for NSF should be, because there are, of course, many competing worthy priorities. But I do know that of the NSF's $7.47 billion budget, if we look at the number of proposals that received very good or excellent reviews, which means they were in the top, the top-rated proposals that went unfunded because of the lack of funds, that's another $3.92 billion. So that would correspond to an NSF budget 1.5 times what the current budget is without compromising in the least bit on quality.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Esty. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witnesses for coming today. Fascinating testimony. I share the interest in planetary defense with Congressman Rohrabacher, and I'm glad to know that Arecibo will continue to monitor for our planetary defense. Have you published any studies on our planetary defense?
I'm not aware of any, but I will check and find out. I'm sure that other agencies have, but I'm not aware of studies that.
If you have, I'd appreciate them if you would send them to my office. And might state clearly that I do appreciate the direction that you're taking the agency now compared to the last administration. And as the chairman pointed out, the 700,000 on a climate change musical, or $1.5 million to study pasture management in Mongolia. I remember medieval basket weaving, studying why one certain segment of women are fat. I mean, compared to the China budget that somebody's talking about before, I think we'll find that we spend more real resources on research than they do. And I think if they got caught wasting the money on some of the things we have done, they'd probably put some people to death over there for it. All we can do is struggle to protect the taxpayers from stuff like that in the future. You mentioned the opioid crisis. My driving question is going to be whether or not we have put any study toward the behavioral sciences. Have we ever looked at the opioid crisis or the root causes of violence in our schools?
So certainly, within a variety of our directorates, including our social, behavioral, and economic sciences, studies of behavior have been crucial in helping us to understand why various trends happen in society, how to make change, how to change people's behavior. That is part, I think, of the fundamental work in the social behavioral sciences. And so we certainly have some investment in those kinds of things, and we can follow up with some very particular kinds of examples for you if that would be useful.
I would like information on particular resources you've developed on the opioid crisis and also the violence in our schools.
Certainly, and again, these would be resources that our funded principal investigators have produced with NSF funding, and so we can certainly survey what we have and get that to you.
Okay. Any insight that you could give us now as to what they revealed?
I think we need to get back to you with details to be sure that we get it to be accurate.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Posey. And the gentlewoman from Nevada, Ms. Rosen, is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. Thank you to the distinguished panel here today. Really appreciate your work and your all the advancements that you've made in your commitment to science. You know, I want to really talk about computer science because it's really critical right now. I'm a former computer scientist myself, that as our economy changes and we become increasingly driven by technology and data analytics, whether it's hard science or behavioral science, in order for us to move our country forward in meaningful ways. This committee really has tried to ensure that we're educating the next generation of computing experts. I'd like to thank the Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Johnson. We did get my bills passed, Code Like a Girl, and the Building Blocks of STEM to help in our education for young girls in early childhood. But one of my top budget requests is for the Computer Information Science and Engineering Program, which supports both computer and information science and engineering research. It's going to cut, the President's budget is cutting this size by $19 million. So, Dr. Córdova, I really want to see if you could address the changes NSF is making in its approach to supporting computer science, especially in the lower grades, to ensure that we have the people pipeline coming through. How do we best support? You talk about the evolution of our education that needs to happen. It can't just happen at the university level. We have to prepare these kids coming up. We're getting these big budget cuts. How can we do that?
Thank you, Congresswoman Rosen, and thank you for your passion on this subject. Actually, so there are two things I want to say. One is the computer and information science and engineering is not really being cut because they're an enormous part of the big ideas. In fact, the two convergence accelerators, one is harnessing the data revolution, is all in that area, and the other one is the future of work at the human technology frontier, and that's about artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks, and so on. And so they're an integral part of shaping those accelerators and of the big corresponding fundamental big ideas. In K through 12, we have several programs in computer science. I'll just run through the names of them and we can send you follow-up details, but Computer Science for All supports researcher-practitioner partnerships that foster the need to bring computational thinking to schools at that level. We have STEM plus C, computing partnerships in K through 12, innovative technology experiences for students and teachers, discovery research pre-K through 12. Those are all K through 12 programs that promote the interest of students and their capabilities to participate in the STEM and computer science workforce.
Thank you. I really appreciate that because I think if we don't build our natural people pipeline, starting in kindergarten, especially with young girls and minorities, people who don't think that they can do this or these things aren't open to them, then we are really losing a valuable asset to our future growth. So thank you for your work. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Rosen. And the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, is recognized for his question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that, and I appreciate each one of you being here today. I'm glad to have you, and appreciate the very interesting testimony. And I was very interested in the Puerto Rican observatory, and I'm grateful to hear what's going to happen there. One thing that seems to have been highly emphasized here today, and it's appropriate to emphasize it, is the budget, because we're talking about budget today. But what I continue to hear is the detriment that's going to happen to the budget from my friends across the aisle. But it's okay to point out problems. I don't mind pointing out problems. Let's tackle them. Let's take them head on. But when we talk about percentage of growth in, say, tech spending in China versus tech spending in the U.S., nobody talks about what the baseline is. Because if you're going to make an assessment that's on comparability of funding, you really need to know what the baseline is when you start talking about percentages. And China, over the last 30 years, has increased dramatically in their overall funding and tech spending. But their baseline was very low to begin with. And now the projections are sometime in the early 2020s, they will actually meet somewhere near where the United States is. But as far as real dollars go, the U.S. continues to be a leader there. And I think that's critical to understand. And then the other thing I would say, there's a lot that goes into creating a national budget. And China already is overall matching EU spending, according to the reports that I just read, because I was curious when I start hearing all this, I said, I'm going to pull up some reports and see what I can get. But there are other things that are not, other variables not in consideration here. For instance, are we tacitly subsidizing anybody else who's doing research because we're spending defense and for defense and military and protecting those countries so they can put money elsewhere? What level of taxation do my friends want to support the spending level they seek? And then are there other programs within the federal government that they might wish to reduce to backfill what they view as a reduction for the NSF? So these are some thoughts that I raise before I get to my question, but I appreciate that you're here and actually for a forum to kind of vent on what solutions are being brought to the table, because I'm just hearing problems brought to the table. The federal government has been funding STEM education for decades, Dr. Córdova. Every year, larger emphasis is placed on the subject, and every year we hear how we're falling further behind. I'm interested in knowing what have we learned from previous investments in STEM about what is working, what is not working. How can we be confident that new investments are being put in the right place for the right activities? In other words, how can we become the most efficient, the most effective?
Great, thank you. You have a whole range of things that you've covered there. So I'll start with solutions, because that's where you're going, and then I'll ask Dr. Farini Monday to answer your last question about STEM and efficiencies, and especially evaluation and assessment, which is our middle name. That NSF is well known for doing that for all of its programs. But on solutions, that's why we have structured a different budget for FY19 than we've presented heretofore. That we have a number of National Academy reports out of committees of the National Science and Technology Council, advice of our advisory councils, and advice of the National Science Board, that we need to be especially strategic in this day and age to meet challenges and to try to deliver solutions for the country as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And that's why we came up with this idea that is now a structural idea in our budget of convergence accelerators, to try to target those areas that are most ready because they have the most public interest and the most industry participation, and really go after some near-term solutions in that space that we can bring to people very quickly. The majority of our budget, as you know, NSF welcomes all proposals. It's what we call our core funding, and we fund blue sky ideas. We take some risk. Some of them, like the LIGO that we funded for 40 years, after 40 years they produce Nobel Prize winning results. But we also need to reserve a part of our budget to be very strategic and very focused on solutions. So we're doing that, and I hope that you will like the results that we get from this. But let me turn to Dr. Farini Monday about evaluation and assessment.
Thank you. So that's a really important topic for us. We want to be sure that our investments in STEM education are strategic and are likely to have impact. And for that reason, for many decades now, NSF has funded not only attempts at intervening and improving STEM ed, but attempts to study and evaluate and assess the effects of those kinds of efforts. And I'll cite just a few key results where we really have a solid basis in research to talk about change and improvement in STEM ed. One is at the undergraduate level, and we've got academy reports that help with this. But we've learned very firmly through research that to retain undergraduates in STEM, a very key principle is to engage them actively in their learning. And so to be sure that instruction is really designed to bring those students in, to give them research experience as a part of what they're doing in their undergraduate courses, and to make sure that they have the chance to really see what STEM looks like in practice. That sounds fairly straightforward. It turns out to make that kind of a change in our nation's universities is not straightforward, but it's something that we know that we should be headed toward. At K through 12, we know a lot about teachers and about what will help teachers be most effective in getting kids to learn well, and some of that has to do with the nature of how they understand the STEM subjects and how particularly elementary teachers in such fundamental areas as mathematics are prepared to be effective in meeting children where they are and moving them toward deep understanding of mathematics. So we have an array of findings, and we're applying those in how we actually design our programs.
Thank you. I've far exceeded my time.
Thank you, Mr. Bigg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, who may well be in contention for having one of the best attendance records of any member of this committee.
Thank you for that shout out, Mr. Chairman. I certainly appreciate the work the NSF has done over the years, together with the NIH and NASA, really put America as an undisputed leader of science for the past half century. But we see that that may be changing, and we need to worry about that. I appreciate your statement, Dr. Córdova, that we will not have this discoveries of tomorrow without the workforce of tomorrow. But then I see a 15% reduction in the graduate research fellowships and also research experience for undergraduates. Now, being a graduate student is pretty tough to make ends meet, and to get grants is a very big deal. How can we kind of square that? Because we see when you're a graduate student in the sciences, your contemporaries are out there making 10 times as much money as you are, and you get your PhD, and then you become a postdoc, and again, they're increasing and you're holding flat. So how can we sort of square that against a desire to have more people move into the STEM fields?
So we fund graduate students in a great variety of ways. The biggest program that we have is for graduate research assistantships, and that comes through our grants programs when a professor is awarded a grant and then can support graduate students on that. And that's indeed how I was funded once upon a time. And we have other programs like the Graduate Research Fellowships Program. There's a very distinctive program that we're very, very proud of. Until just a few years ago, we could fund, we funded 1,000 students per year and new awards. And then we raised it for a few years to 2,000, and now it's at 1,500, which is still higher than it was before. We have introduced a new program called Research and Traineeship Programs in specific areas like computer science and nanotechnology to train cohorts of graduate students. So I think that the traineeship of students and the ability to get into the research world at an early stage and be funded to do that research just couldn't be more important. And you yourself were one of those students at one time, and all three of us were as well.
Well, I didn't mean to put you on the hot seat there, but I did want to raise that deduction in the research fellowships and undergraduate research.
Yeah, could I just add to that? So China has made a commitment, and this is extraordinary, to devote 15% of their GDP to talent development, okay? And so part of that is going into, they don't define exactly what talent development is in all ways, but certainly the 1,000 Talents program that they've implemented is to bring back Chinese scholars who have studied outside of China, to bring them back to China and set them up in a research career. So, I had a postdoctoral fellow who worked with me, and he was hired back to a university in China, giving a startup package that was the equivalent of a full professor, and he got an assistant professorship position. So they are investigating very aggressively to bring their talent back home, and
Thank you.
we need to be aware of that.
I don't want you to use all of my time on that question. The opioid crisis, it's multi-pronged, it's a human behavioral issue. Is there research the NSF could do that would help us understand and maybe deal with that crisis? And also you can add gun violence into that answer if you wish.
So our head of social and behavioral economic research program, Dr. Faye Cook, is a member of the administration's opioid task force, and they are working on interagency solutions to address this. And we would be happy to look into particular research that we're funding along those lines, Dr. McNerney, and get back to you.
Thank you. I guess I have another half minute. NSF has shown over time a commitment to cooperation with international scientists, but you've recently announced the closures of offices in Beijing, Brussels, and Tokyo by this summer. Can you kind of explain how that was decided?
This was a strategic move to be more with the times as far as approaching the question of where where could we make the biggest scientific advances internationally in international collaborations. Having one person at each of 3 offices is arguably not the way to do that. It puts a huge demand on their intellectual capacity to understand all things and also to cover an enormous sector of the globe because we had only 3 offices. In fact, what we see more and more today, for example, in financial institutions, is that teams of experts go to countries to evaluate the possible portfolios, to judge what is the quality of assets, what kinds of people are running the assets, and where collaborations that are win-win collaborations for all the countries involved and really contribute to intellectual merit can be had. And so this is our plan, and we have 2 groups already in formation to go to, one to Europe and one to Asia, to study very specific areas which we think are vital for economic growth in our country, and we want to see what other countries could bring to the table. So we think it's a better plan, and it's, as I said, more in keeping with the time. It's the way industry does it.
Well answered. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. McNerney. And the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Dunn, is recognized for his.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank the panelists for being here. Dr. Córdova, it's great to see you again. I think last time we were together, we were standing on an ice sheet in Greenland. So it's still pretty cold by my Floridian standards here, I'll be honest with you. And I will tell you that I've enjoyed the time I've had chatting about science with Dr. Córdova. I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to chat with the other panelists on a more personal basis. And certainly the chairman knows that I will spend the whole time here talking about science with you if I could, but we're here to talk about the budget, so here we go. In all the major corporations and government agencies that I've been associated with, they have an audit process in plan for auditing the processes and the finances, both inside an organization. I'd like to know a little bit about your audit plan and processes.
This is a perfect topic for my chief operating officer.
Okay.
And also possibly for our board chair to pick up, because this is something that is done jointly with the National Science Foundation and the National Science Board. But we have our major audit is our annual financial statement audit that occurs each year, and that is quite consuming for the agency overall, in that we begin the minute that it's completed with the preparation of materials and our interactions with the external auditors.
Okay, so that's good to hear. So you have external auditors
Yes.
as well as the GAO involved in this? I guess it's the
absolutely.
GAO, am I right?
Well, no,
The
these are
Inspector
private.
General has a private firm come in and do it under the auspices of the Inspector General.
Excellent, excellent. And do you alternate those a few years with one firm, then another firm?
They were just,
Yes,
it was
we
just
have a new firm
alternated
now.
last year.
Oh, great, great. So this annual report, I'm not privy to that. Is that something that's in our package? It's not in the one I received, no?
I believe it's online. We can certainly
send
get
you the-
And the agency, of course, writes its own response in the board.
Would,
The Inspector General's office comes up through the Oversight Committee of the National Science Board, and I'm happy to say that NSF has received an unqualified audit report. So.
excellent.
With no, for 20 years, we've had a clean report in a row, and this year we had no significant deficiency either. So Chairman Smith, I'm very proud of that.
That's-
Our facilities one's gone away. So.
Yeah, I think that's important. You know, the taxpayers are where we're constantly in our offices. We're constantly, bombarded with complaints, outrageous complaints about, this study was studying something useless and meaningless and wasting taxpayer dollars. And so, how do you answer those complaints when you get them?
Okay, so that's different than the, it's a little different than the financial report is on our
Oh, yeah, I'm
financial
sorry.
systems. But
I think an audit should look at not just finances, also processes and also product.
right. And certainly the board is one of the best places where looking at the quality of what we're doing. And
Yeah, so
oversight.
the National Science Board oversees the foundation, and the director is a member of that board. So, we look through, NSF compiles information on peer review and that is given to the board, and the board looks at that with great scrutiny, and always pressing the National Science Foundation to improve its processes, because I think the process for peer review is quite robust, but it can always be improved. The chairman has made it a point to keep after the agency on that, and we're very serious in our oversight role. And NSF agrees that constant improvement is worthwhile.
And Congress has to take a lot of credit because through reports like the AICA, that they've gotten us to also look more intensely at our processes and to adopt new ones. So as a result of the AICA and the NAPA report and a report from our own Business and Operations Advisory Committee, I instituted the position starting this past January of Chief Officer for Research Facilities. This is one example because in the research facility areas that we've had a number of critiques over the past few years. And so this has dramatically, in just a few months' time, dramatically improved our oversight, and it allows me as director to really see the agency and what's happening in all the different facility areas immediately.
I'm running out of time, but I just would like to say I would like to see the report that the board sees, if we could, on the finances, processes, and the products. But that's very good. And thank you very much. Always good to see you again, Dr.
We will provide that to you.
I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, is recognized.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to our witnesses for being here today and for the very important work that you do. I want to be clear, we should not be flat funding education, and we should not be flat funding research. Flat funding for almost a decade will mean cuts, certainly, to critical programs. And I listened as Representative McNerney was quizzing you about the education cuts. I would have to say it goes further than that, because the research cuts are a critical component. And I just want to do that through the eyes of a brilliant student that I represent in the capital region of New York. And it illustrates exactly why education and research funding should be a national priority. Erin Byrne Rousseau is from Burnt Hills, New York, in the capital region, 20th Congressional District of New York. She grew up in the capital region and went to college at the University of Albany, where she studied nanoscale science. She's currently working toward a PhD in medical engineering at Harvard, MIT Health Sciences and Technology. Erin is a member of the Science Policy Initiative, a student group created to support the next generation of scientists and engineers in contributing to robust science-based policy making. Erin is grateful for the federal support that allowed her to excel at her studies. As an undergrad, she was inspired by her university, where many programs in research were made possible by federal funding, such as NSF, NIH, DOE, and more. She is an NSF Graduate Research Fellowship awardee, and the research she has worked on was possible in part from NIH funding. In the lab, she used technology that would not exist if it were not for DOE funding. Erin is working on research to study the neurological basis of mental health disorders, and her research has implications for our understanding and the treatment of mental health and addiction. Erin is truly impressive, and she's just at the beginning of what I believe is a great career. Erin thanked me for supporting funding for science and research. And Erin, let me say thank you for all that you are doing for all of us and all you will do. And to my colleagues, we need more Erins who are going to be inspired to choose a STEM pathway and who will repay our nation's commitment by moving science forward and changing our world. Dr. Córdova, do you agree that NSF has the power to inspire our next generation of scientists and engineers? And if so, what effect would budget cuts or flat funding have on our future workforce?
Yes, of course. I think that NSF has the opportunity and the privilege to inspire the next generation of scientists and engineers, and they can come from anywhere. They can be errands, they can be young children, they can be people looking for transitions in the jobs that they already have. and we've mentioned a couple of times here that there's a lot of proposals that are judged at the very highest level, the rating of excellent, that we simply are not able to fund within our budget.
I would hope that we would understand that as we put a budget together, because these cuts are severe. Flat funding sounds kind, but it is brutal. I'm disappointed to see also that the large proposed cuts that are levied at social, behavioral, and in economics research. Cuts to social and behavioral science will ripple out across many science, technology, engineering, and mathematics research fields, hurting those fields as well. Behavioral sciences have had widespread positive impact on our nation and the world. In fact, every winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics since 1997 has been a recipient of a social, behavioral, and economic sciences grant at the National Science Foundation, the very division some suggest we should slash. We must continue our investment in behavioral sciences, and we should continue a long bipartisan tradition of funding and conducting research across the federal government. That research, by very definition, will have many failures, but failure is the down payment on success. Can you speak to the value of the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate to issues of national importance?
Yes, we have many, many examples of huge impact of the social and behavioral sciences. And again, the National Academy's report that came out last spring cited a long list of those. Among them are the auctioning of the electromagnetic, auction of the airwaves spectrum by the FCC, the organ kidney donor exchange programs that grew out of game theory, the predictive policing that is proving so helpful in some of our big cities and towns. They've done a lot of research on risk and resilience to natural disasters like hurricanes and tornadoes and other disasters that befall the planet. And in the areas of learning, I think they can be especially important of how children that come from different backgrounds and experiences, how they learn, how they assimilate their knowledge and create new knowledge. And I turn to my colleague, Dr. Zuber, for some other examples.
So studies, there have been studies of why do children from excellent families go off and experience terrorism, okay? And so it turns out that it's, there's research into that has been useful in identifying that. And even, young people who turn to terrorism from poor economic, the poor part of the economic spectrum, it was found that, there's some moral and idealistic causes that are motivating them, as opposed to economic causes. So it's not just a case of getting them into a better economic circumstances, that one needs to look at moral imperatives that are different from terrorism, that are more productive. So that's another example.
Well, I think the information that comes from neuroscientists and cognitive scientists can be very, very useful in responding to many of the needs we have out there. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay. I now recognize Mr. Hulkran for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all so much for being here. Grateful for your work and grateful for the opportunity for us to talk about the great work that NSF is doing and the really requirement that we must continue to fund and grow funding. I've had the chance to visit universities across the state of Illinois, have had the chance to work and see what NSF is doing there and other great places. I'll actually be at Northern Illinois University this Saturday with my STEM scholars. It's 30 young people from around the 7 counties that I represent that I meet with every single month, and wonderful group, incredibly bright, very excited to, out of the 30, almost 30, I think about 18 or 19 of them are young women, 10 or 11 are young men. So encouraged by that too, that we need everybody to be interested in science and STEM fields. But we're going to be traveling to NIU, where we are going to visit the Sub-Ice rover, which was used to explore Antarctica, as well as the STEM Maker Lab, and our group is going to be only the second group to use NAU's new laser cutters, which we're really excited about. I've had a good opportunity also through First Robotics to meet with some great young people in my area. Just a couple years ago, met with a young woman from my district who was able to earn a full ride scholarship to the University of Alabama in aerospace engineering. But one of her main concerns, as I've continued to visit with her and talk with her and learn from her, is for her to see peers who are very excited about STEM become discouraged and change degrees in their first few years of college. Bright young people who were so used to getting straight A's and now all of a sudden are getting B's and C's and decide this isn't for me. Since I'm not getting an A, I must need to switch to some other course. So I just wanted to check, Dr. Córdova, if maybe you could address what work is NSF doing to make sure that students going through these kinds of tough fields are able to maintain their passion and avoid washing out of these programs when maybe they aren't getting the A's that they were used to through high school.
I'm going to turn in just a moment to Dr. Fruni Monday because she's very familiar with the research that we're actually doing in this area. So let me just rewind to when I was a university president and really worried about that. And I was worried about what we called gateway courses that would look to your left, look to your right. One of the people sitting there won't be there at the end of the semester, kind of thing. And so I think universities have a lot of responsibilities, and I think Dr. Zuber, being from MIT, will agree with me that ensuring that the instructors are actually motivating students to get through rather than weeding them out and screen. And I think there have been a lot of programs that universities are changing in this direction. We had in engineering at Purdue University, it's an engineering education whole department within that College of Engineering, which is huge, that is specifically trying to look at new methodologies for getting students through these kinds of courses, not just in engineering, but university-wide. And I think when I see the retention rates, and as a university president, I would look at the retention rates between the first and the second year. And we increased that from the kind of low levels you're describing to something like 97, 98% of students would continue on. So
that's great.
Things are improving.
I can't add a lot other than to say congratulations to you on your STEM scholars. That's
Thanks.
A wonderful investment of time, I should think. So, a couple of other points. As Dr. Córdova mentions, it's those gateway courses that are quite critical for retention. And we are funding some interesting experiments in changing up the content of those courses, starting with a statistics or a quantitative reasoning kind of approach rather than always calculus, which is the tradition. And that's showing some terrific results. And a variety of other approaches to helping faculty improve their instruction so that they are inspiring students and strengthening K through 12 education.
Yes, that's so important too. Let me jump on just in my last minute. Dr. Córdova, as you know, accelerator physics is a field where industry and even our DOE labs find a shortage of trained workers. We're only graduating about 15 PhDs a year. There are only a few universities that have accelerator physics programs to train these workers. Many of the students go out of their way to be able to get the schoolwork necessary to advance in these fields. We're fortunate with NIU being relatively close to Fermilab, having some opportunities there. Stanford has SLAC close by, which is great. But when a university is not near one of the national labs, many students actually have to take part in intense 2-week accelerator school programs every summer where students come to one location to get their graduate level training. It's my understanding that NSF will be discontinuing their accelerator science program. It's a program that was started in 2014 to address the workforce shortage and ensure that the United States was maintaining their position at the forefront of this field. This has not been a large program by any means, but I think it is an important one for the field. I'm also concerned that broader physics grants will not take into account the need for basic scientific research in accelerator science. I wonder if, I'm already over time, but maybe we can follow up some more. But if you have a thought or two on this of what we can do to continue to see this as important and making sure that we have the people to fill these important roles.
I can just say that I agree with you. Accelerator physics is what inspired me to become a physicist. We are, of course, a big participant in the CERN Accelerator Physics program, as you've seen at Fermilab, because we've seen each other there on tour, that we are funding a lot of research there. Stanford University, of course, in their efforts. And I'll follow up on the details of the Accelerator Science program.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you, Chairwoman. I'll yield back.
Thank you, and I now recognize Mr. Foster for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your service. You mentioned that the NSF top-line budget was overall flat, but that, I understand, was not the original proposal. That was the number that got adjusted after Democrats insisted on having proper funding for that section of the budget. And so what was the number before the final addendum came out?
Minus 30%.
So a 30% cut, and then the Democrats negotiated it up to flat. Is that a fair summary of what happened?
The President's supplement came out at $2.2 billion supplement, so that's...
At least, yeah, okay. You don't have to
The caps
go into
were
the
raised.
details of the negotiation, but I think that's an important point. Now, one of the features of your proposal is you're going to be closing the NSF offices abroad that you've announced, I guess, last month that the offices in Tokyo, Brussels, and Beijing were being closed. You also said near in, I guess, all of your testimonies that the rest of the world is catching up and in some cases passing us. So what is, given that we'll have a lot more to learn scientifically and in collaboration with other countries, what's the motivation for closing the foreign?
So exactly right, Dr. Foster. We have a lot more to learn, and we think that having one person in each of 3 offices abroad is not the most efficient way to learn about the science that we can really do in a high-quality, directed, focused way with other countries. That demands a lot of them in terms of intellectual breadth, in terms of covering a vast geography. So we're adopting a practice that is well used in industry these days, which is of sending expert teams of scientists, engineers from different parts of the country, and they'll be accompanied by a couple of NSF people, to certain areas where we think that there are assets that they have that could be complementary to our assets, and the assets include physical ones as well as human capital. And we're looking in depth at what the nature of a collaboration could be. So take like quantum research or artificial intelligence, or we're disposing a team soon to look at synthetic biology. So with careful background study of what are the areas and invitations from the other countries to look at these, we think that we can have more win-win collaborations where we really understand what they bring to the table and what we do. So it's a new strategic approach.
So this is doesn't represent a drop in your interest in international collaboration?
Absolutely. It
just
represents
what you hope to be a more efficient deployment of resources for that. Okay, well, thank you. That's important. How much do you end up spending on research into handgun violence?
I don't believe it's a direct topic for us. We could look across various programs to see if there's fundamental research.
Is it prohibited, or do you have any calls for proposals at any point?
I would have to look into our background.
Okay, if you could,
find out more about
I'd be
that.
interested to know if you are also handcuffed in this area as other areas of federal research.
My hunch would be we have some fundamental social science research that would certainly inform questions in that area, but I would have to check to be certain.
Yeah, but even prohibitions on accumulating basic statistics, for example, are things that we run into in other areas. You also mentioned the workforce thing and the need to make sure that we keep the best and brightest from other countries that we educate here. Ms. Córdova, you're a physicist. Have you ever in your career had 2 first author physical review letters published in the same year?
No, I published in the Astrophysical Journal.
Okay, all right. Well, same question.
Okay,
yeah.
Same question. Have I ever had 2 papers
2 in a
published?
year. Just so you
Oh,
sort of-
absolutely.
Oh, as the first author yourself?
As a first author, probably. I
Okay.
could just...
Well, no,
direct-
just
yeah,
because
I published a
I
lot in
encountered
my
a
day.
situation.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I encountered a situation recently where you, as I, have probably penned letters for an Einstein visa. for, you know, very talented people. Yeah, I see some nods from the other. And where you see, you know, you're in this heartbreaking situation where someone that you just know should be a keeper, and you can't, the one that I was unsuccessful at getting recently had been first author in 2 physical review letters, a postdoc. As a postdoc, was first author in 2 PRLs, which are, you know, the premier peer-reviewed journal. And yet, that was insufficient to get an Einstein visa. And so my question is, when you see, you know, in the presence of, you know, that sort of failure, I think that we've all had from time to time in getting people permission to stay, and then you read that, you know, a model was given the Einstein visa for probably non-STEM associated skills. You know, does it strike you that we're just way off the mark in what we're trying to accomplish with getting high-skilled immigrants into the U.S.?
Excuse me, thank you for the question, Dr. Foster. So I don't know the qualifications of any of the other people who, you know, were awarded the Einstein visa, so I can't really do a comparison because there are needs in many different areas. But I will certainly say that the individual that you mentioned, that's an absolutely top journal in the field, and you know, obviously that individual is very accomplished. What I would say is that certainly within this country there is additional capacity to keep the top, highest achieving individuals from all over the world, and in fact, you know, that has been our modus operandi in this country, to attract the best and the brightest from around the world, and I hope that we continue to do that.
And thank you, and yield back.
Thank you, and I now recognize Dr. Babin for 5 minutes.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chairman. And thank you, you witnesses, for being here with your valuable testimony. And Dr. Córdova, good to see you again. And I'd like to ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind. The U.S. is one of the most, if not the most, innovative and technologically advanced nation in the world, yet we lag behind other industrial nations in ensuring that American students receive the requisite skills for success in a 21st century workforce. How would you each, I'm asking you too, Dr. Zuber, both of you, how would you each define success in the field of STEM studies and computer science education? And do you think that we can achieve this, and when? Let's start with Dr. Córdova.
Clearly, we must, because that it is a skill that that everyone really needs to have for all sorts of occupations, not only STEM alone. And we have a great variety of programs that we fund over all ages, from K through 12, undergraduate, graduate, postdoc, and early career, and beyond, to try to give people the opportunity to really increase their STEM and computer science capabilities. In fact, our real goal is to provide access to everyone, and that's why we call one of our programs Computer Science for All. We also have, interestingly, for the past 24 years, an advanced technological education program that is mainly housed in our community colleges nationwide. Thus far, we've sponsored 1,500 awards and have over $300 million in industry support, because they are partnerships with industry in retraining workers for skilled jobs. And a lot of that curriculum has to do with computer science as well.
Okay, and
Yeah,
Dr. Zuber.
And so let me just add that one can look at computer science a couple of different ways. There is advancing that specific field, okay, and then there is infusing the results of those skills into a whole variety of other different fields, and so both of those actually need to occur, and they need to occur not only at the level of students who get four-year degrees, but also in what we call the skilled technical workforce. So workers who, we call this STEM awareness, okay, who don't necessarily have a STEM degree, but virtually any job that you can think of today, a whole variety of jobs that you can think of, requires some amount of STEM skill and computation skill or computer skill. So even, working at a grocery store, the electronic readers. And so, this is addressed in the ATE program, which deals with community colleges, and it's also a focus of the National Science Board to look at these skilled technical workforces, to look at what it's going to take to provide points of entry to students at various levels to get into these programs, to get training, and then to realize that there needs to be, retraining and retraining to improve skills.
Okay, I need to ask one more question, get it in before my time has expired. I saw in the news this past weekend that some American scientists were stranded in Antarctica when a U.S. vessel could not reach them. Unfortunately, NSF, working with Argentina partners who had an icebreaker and a helicopter, were able to successfully rescue them. First, congratulations on the rescue. But second, it brings up whether or not the United States has sufficient icebreaking capacity. What is the status of NSF's efforts to ensure the continued availability of an icebreaker for our polar programs? Dr. Córdova.
Thank you. So we have a number of vessels with different ice-breaking capability, and ourselves none with very deep ice-breaking capability. So we rely on the U.S. Coast Guard for that, and we lease time from them in order to help us to support our mission. And I know that there is some funding to the Coast Guard, or perhaps it's in the proposal stage, but I think there is some advanced funding for them to look into having more capability in this area. Our preferred mode is not to own a deep ice cutting vessel, and they're not research vessels, but they are for that purpose, but to keep renting them. And otherwise, we have, as I said, a number of actual research vessels that have very modest cutting capability. And thank you for mentioning that example. We are very happy that 5 researchers are fine.
All right. My time has expired, Madam Chairman. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I now recognize Mr. Byer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank all of you for being willing to come into a public forum on the Ides of March. You're very brave, that is. With appropriate respect for the chairman's criticisms of specific research awards, the elephant in the room is still the flat budget. 9 years in a row, the steadily falling percentage of excellent projects approved, U.S. losing its global leadership to China and perhaps to others. I think this is the most necessary oversight responsibility the Science Committee has, is to keep American science strong, which means keeping the National Science Foundation strong. So, Dr. Zuber, a cultural question for you as chair of the National Science Board. What can you do, what can we do, what should we be doing to build public support for additional federal funding for the National Science Foundation? Especially given that our lives are so transformed by the science that you have developed. Why don't we value it? How do we increase that sense of value in our lives?
Yeah, so I think, so first of all, thank you for those comments, and thank you for your support on this crucially important topic for the nation. I think the director and her team have taken great efforts to try to make the science that NSF does understandable broadly to people in the country, but there's still a lot to be learned, and I frankly think that that NSF is an underappreciated agency for what it does. So people have heard of the NIH because they know it does medical research, and people may have heard of the NSF, but they don't realize just the broad scope of science that it covers, everything from the polar science to high energy physics, to astrophysics, to the earth sciences, biological sciences, and beyond. So one of the things that I say, every time you see a NASA image of space, it has a NASA logo in the center, and we encourage the NSF to start getting the word out of, branding NSF. So when when you go out and you have conversations with people and you let them know the kind of work that NSF does, they generally seem broadly supportive. But the question is, with all of the noise that we have around us today, how do you reach those people and get the message? And we're always looking for opportunities to do that.
It sounds like getting the most robust communications department would help.
Absolutely.
Maybe sponsor a NASCAR vehicle with NSF on the side.
Well, some of the videos that the Office of Legislative and Public Affairs have put together have been absolutely spectacular and have won national awards, and that's been very helpful.
There's an old political idiom that nothing happens in politics unless you tell somebody about it. Maybe the same thing here. So on that line, and this may be a dangerous suggestion, so forgive me for a dangerous suggestion, but it may make sense at some level to have a nonpartisan, non-ideological person look at the grants one final time before they go out, just to make sure that we don't put a chairman, whether a Democratic or Republican chairman, in the position of saying, that sure doesn't sound legitimate. A non-scientific eye at something that's going to go out to the general public.
We've, largely because of this committee, I think we've really upped our transparency and accountability processes, and we're very sensitive to titles and abstracts because we, unlike many other agencies, we publish everything online. So it is really open and people can see immediately what it looks like. We have now a non-technical abstract which is geared towards public consumption. And we think that we are, we believe we've really improved our readability of what we're doing, and also brought cognizance to the entire agency that people are looking and they're really evaluating the value of the benefit to the nation just on a few sentences that are there describing the research and its potential benefits. So we've taken a lot of steps in that direction. As far as your suggestion of whom to have on the committees that finally approve that, I think that's an interesting suggestion, and I'll take it back and we'll consider it. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, and I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I think we earlier had some students from Paul VI High School. I don't know if we have any left, but thank them for joining us. And I wanted to start out by thanking Dr. Córdova for your strong statement about zero tolerance for sexual harassment that you recently made in light of some of the things that this committee as well as others had looked at. So as you may know, we had a hearing on sexual harassment in science and sort of the role that some of the, with these grants and people who really can determine your future in terms of whether you're going to get into the fields that you want, and how that impacted that because of harassment. And I think we didn't get into it as deep as we might, but I think it's something we do need to look at more, the long-term wage impact, because when you are, we know that when women are harassed in a specific field, they are very likely to leave that field and not get back into it. And particularly when you have some avenues here that if they're closed off, you may not have someplace else to go. I was wondering if you could just, in light of your very strong statement, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to address that, and maybe for the others, since we are blessed to have 3 women panelists here today, I thought it might be a good opportunity to hear directly from you.
Well, thank you very, very much, Chairwoman Comstock, for your passion, your interest, for having the hearing. And of course, we all listened to the hearing remotely. It was very good to get it all out on the table, and some very, very important points were made. The important thing to recognize about our statement, and now, of course, our statement has turned into a notice in the Federal Register that is open for public comment for 60 days. And we will be absorbing all those comments, and we're doing that as we go. We're not waiting to the end of the period, so we've already started that. Is that we also have robust processes to send compliance team reviews to universities to say, hey, are you doing what you're supposed to do? And we review their cases. The team talks with a lot of individuals at all levels of the university, from the students to the administration and all, and that's
And I was wondering, I forgot to add in, do we have percentages, and my apologies if I should know, but what percentage of these grants and projects are female-led?
We can certainly find that out. I mean, I know we have, well, for one thing, earlier we talked a little bit about the annual merit review report that the agency produces for the National Science Board, and there we have the proposals as a function of gender and also minorities representation that are given to us in how many we approve. And so we can then make the assumption that if you're the lead investigator, that you are also leading the research. So yes, we have those statistics. And actually women do very well, I think about 1 percentage point higher success rate than male gender.
All right. And Dr. Zuber?
Yeah, so if I could just add, so the National Science Board fully supported the director in wanting to get out ahead of this issue. And we're particularly, there was a lot of discussion about this, but we were incredibly supportive of the fact that it's very, very important to have due process. But if a university has a process and an investigation takes place where it's enough evidence is deemed that it goes to a full-out investigation, that it needs to be reported to NSF, and this is because it might make sense to get a substitute principal investigator in there, and this is to really, care about the personal situation of the person who has been experiencing the harassment, and so we consider this to be a real step forward, and NSF as an agency has really taken the lead on this. And what I hope is other agencies, I think, are also looking at policies, and I hope we don't get a different policy for every agency. I hope that I personally think that the NSF policy, it's very thought out because the director had a great deal of experience, unfortunately, in dealing with issues like this, on panels and such that have made recommendations throughout her career. And but it would be very cumbersome if all the agencies just came up with different ways of dealing with it.
And can I say one more thing, that this is only the beginning for us, that we are having bi-weekly meetings that Dr. Farini-Mundy chairs within the agency to talk about what else we can do in this area. For example, codes of conduct at all our field sites, whether it's Antarctica or environmental field site, wherever we have hundreds of them. And are all the codes of conduct, do they all start with similar language? And then do they fulfill the basic needs, namely that if something happens at a field site, that exactly this has to be posted in an open public place, where to go, how to get help, and how to follow through. And so we are just consistently, we're going to keep working on this until we're satisfied that we have done everything we can, and we're hoping that in the public comment period there'll be even more suggestions about what else we might think of.
Okay, so this information will be out there, so the students, the young women themselves, will just have more of an awareness about it, where to go, how to proceed if something happens. Because I know as we're talking about the pipeline, I think of this week I was at a STEM charter school, and they had a STEM club that had been started by the young girls there. Then they were teaching the boys how to have one too. So they had the first one. And fourth graders, Coco and Miriam, who escorted me around their lab and told me about all their programs. It just was a real, I think we do have a different atmosphere going on in so many of our schools, and these kids, they were showing me the first graders who were coding already, and you really don't see a difference at that age because the kids haven't learned to have any differences yet, hopefully, and they had a lot of great role models like we have here. So just, any way we can get that message through and then sustain it so that we are keeping that pipeline, because it really did seem, as we went through the process of the hearing, if you watched it, you saw that the wage gap could very much be a much bigger part connected to sexual harassment than we have recognized in the past. So, okay. Well, I think I am up with my time, but...
Yes, it's playing cleanup here. It's been a delight to listen to all of you, and this is one of the most important agencies in the United States, really. I mean, not always appreciated, but driving innovation and allowing for really smart people to research and to lead us forward to better times. I think we're sort of at a very serious inflection point in our country, and you've addressed some of the issues. Are other nations competing more vigorously? The flat budget for multiple years, that with a flat budget, costs increase, you can buy less. I'm concerned that we have had, this is a figure I got from the Judiciary Committee staff, since 2015, a 40% drop in foreign students into the United States, which is not a piece of good news when it comes to science research. And so you put that all together, you've got what we used to have, where we were the center of science research, people from all over the world coming here, robust funding for science, and now a very different picture. So I have some very serious concerns. I know that you all are doing your very best to make the resources that have been made available go as far as they can. This is not a criticism of your fine efforts. One of the things I'm interested in, Dr. Córdova, is how many of the highest rated proposals don't get funded. What's the sheer number? Do you know?
It's almost $4 billion dollars worth of proposals per year, we say, are on the cutting room floor. They are rated excellent, which is the top rating, or very good to excellent. I would say excellence, about $2 billion, about half of that, and the other $2 billion between very good and excellent, but definitely worthy of funding, and we are not able to fund them.
At some point, I remember George Miller, who spent so many years on our Education and Labor Committee, went over and read the proposals that couldn't be funded, and it put him into a depression for a while of all of the things we could have learned had we been able to actually award funding to the most meritorious proposals. I'd like, at some point, to see if we couldn't organize members of the Science Committee who have an interest to do that, to take a look at what got left on the cutting room floor. And just a final comment, I think Congressman Byers was mentioning having somebody look at a last cut as a not scientist. Here's, I think, sometimes a problem. At least the scientists I know tend to be, really smart people, have great senses of humor. And you can have a very serious subject matter and a light touch on the title that may belie the seriousness of the inquiry. So it may be that the lighthearted titles may want to review because they could be misleading. And that's just a thought that I have, because smart people do tend to have a great sense of humor. So with that, I'm going to close this hearing with these comments. I think we're very, very lucky as a nation to have all of you, the service that you are providing to our country. I'm grateful to you for it. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, and I would second that again. And I thank the witnesses for their testimony and the members for their questions. And the record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional written comments and written questions from members. And the hearing is adjourned.